Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We're the show that takes a whole heap of information and boils it down for you fast.
Get you the insights you need.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
today we're diving into something that's, well, it's pretty much everywhere. Astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you actively follow it or not, you see it. Newspaper horoscopes, social media, maybe friends talking about it. You can't really miss it.
No, you really can't. And look, for this deep dive, we're not really here to argue if astrology is true or false for predicting things.
Right.
Instead, we want to unpack why. Why does this ancient practice still mean so much to so many people, even when, science generally disagrees?
And we've cast a pretty wide net for sources this time. We've got stuff from psychology journals, scientific publications like Nature, Discover Magazine.
We looked at historical analyses too, even checked out discussions on places like Reddit and in the Times of India. So a real mix.
We're aiming to give you that comprehensive picture.
Yeah, the goal here is for you to walk away with let's say, a more nuanced view of astrology's whole journey through human history.
And hopefully you'll get some insights into maybe cognitive biases, cultural stuff, and just that timeless human hunt for meaning.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the science part, because scientifically speaking, astrology, the idea that where planets are affects our lives or predicts stuff, it's widely seen as pseudoscience.
Right. There's no real scientific backing for the claims it makes.
So what does the evidence actually show?
Well, there have been quite a few empirical studies, and they consistently show basically a lack of correlation.
Okay.
For instance, there was a big study in 2017, over 65,000 job seekers involved. They all did a personality questionnaire, the basic traits inventory.
And the finding?
No statistical similarities between people with the same star sign, and no real differences across star signs either.
So those stereotypes about, say, Scorpios being intense or Geminis being chatty.
Scientifically, the study concluded they're simply untrue, just not borne out by the data.
And that wasn't the only one, was it?
No, not at all. There was another similar one. 15,000 people matched personality and intelligence tests with birth dates.
I guess.
Yep. No correlation found. Zero.
Wow.
And maybe the most famous one was back in the 80s. American physicist Sean Carlson published in Nature, which is a big deal.
Right.
It was a double-blind test. He got 30 astrologers to try and match 116 people's birth charts to their personality profiles.
How did they do?
They got about a third right, which sounds okay, maybe, but it's exactly what you'd expect if you were just guessing randomly.
Your chance.
Pure chance. And actually, they recreated this test just recently, August 2024, used 152 astrologers this time.
Yeah.
Pretty much the same result, no better than chance.
So predictively, the science just doesn't support it. But you mentioned there are issues even with the astronomy it's based on.
Oh, absolutely. The traditional zodiac, the one most people in the West use, has some, significant astronomical inaccuracies baked right in. Well, first off, it comes from the Babylonians over 3,000 years ago, and they based it on the constellations the sun appeared to pass through. But they adapted it to fit neatly into their 12-month calendar.
Okay.
But the sun actually moves through 13 constellations along that path, the ecliptic, not 12.
So they just left one out.
Seems like it. Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, it was just
Yeah.
omitted arbitrarily, it seems.
Huh. And I guess 12 fits better with 12 months.
Exactly. And it's worth remembering other cultures see different numbers. Some recognize up to 24 zodiac constellations, so the 12 is very specific.
What else?
They also gave each of the 12 signs an equal slice of time, roughly a month.
But the sun doesn't spend equal time in each constellation space, does it?
Not even close. For example, the sun appears aligned with Virgo for about 45 days, but Scorpius, only about 7 days.
So they just ignored that to make it neat.
Pretty much. Smooth it out for the calendar.
Okay, this is already shaky. But you mentioned something else about the sky shifting.
Right. This is maybe the biggest one. It's called the precession on the equinoxes. Think of Earth spinning like a top, but it has a slow wobble.
Okay.
Over thousands of years, about 26,000 years, for a full wobble, that wobble changes our view of the background stars. The whole celestial sphere seems to shift relative to our seasons.
So what does that mean for the zodiac?
It means the constellations aren't where they were 3,000 years ago when the Babylonians set this up.
Bro.
Take someone born on, say, August 4th. Back then, the sun would have been in the constellation Leo today. Because of precession on August 4th, the sun is actually in the constellation Cancer.
So my star sign isn't actually aligned with the constellation it's named after anymore.
For most people using the standard Western zodiac, no. The signs are fixed to the seasons, starting around March 21st, but the constellations themselves have drifted. Your astrological sign and the actual astronomical constellation are out of sync.
It's quite a fundamental disconnect, isn't it?
It really highlights how the astronomical basis for popular astrology is, well, outdated based on today's sky, or even ancient skies if you count Ophiuchus.
Okay, so scientifically shaky, astronomically outdated,
Hmm.
yet it's endured for millennia
Mhm.
across the globe. How? That's the core question.
That's the million-dollar question, and it takes us into the history, the culture, the deep human story behind it all.
Let's get into that journey through time then, because this isn't new. Astrology is ancient.
Incredibly ancient. We're talking roots going back maybe 5,000 years. It's one of the oldest so-called occult sciences.
Where did the first organized systems appear?
Mesopotamia, the old Babylonian period, over 2,000 years ago, though the ancient Egyptians were also mapping stars way back, maybe 13th century BCE.
And focusing on individual destiny, like horoscopes?
That idea, natal astrology, seems to date back to around 1300 BCE. The oldest actual birth chart we found is from 410 BCE in Iraq.
You mentioned the Babylonians. It wasn't just fortune-telling for them, was it? It sounds more integrated.
Oh, definitely. They saw it as a sacred science. It was tied into politics, religion, governance. Their priests literally read the sky like a living tablet.
Divine messages written in the stars.
Kind of. Jupiter wasn't just a planet, it embodied their chief god, Marduk. Venus was the goddess Ishtar. They built these complex mathematical models to predict where things would be. It fostered this deep belief in cosmic order that the universe, and maybe the gods' intentions, could be understood.
And the Egyptians picked this up.
They did. They merged Babylonian astronomy with their own beliefs, their cosmology. For them, the zodiac became almost like a map for the afterlife, a pathway to immortality. You see it on tombs, temples, guiding the soul.
Then things really shifted with the Greeks, right? The Hellenistic period.
Hugely pivotal. That's where you get this real intellectual explosion and mixing of ideas, Babylonian observation, Greek philosophy, Egyptian spirituality, all coming together.
And this is where the tropical zodiac comes in.
Yes, that's key. They developed the tropical zodiac, which isn't tied to the drifting constellations but fixed to the seasons, starting with the spring equinox.
Ah, so that's why Western astrology signs haven't shifted with precession, even though the constellations have. They fixed the start date.
Exactly. It made it universally applicable based on the time of year, not the shifting stars. This period also gave us more complex techniques. Planetary rulers, the 12 houses representing areas of life. Thinkers like Ptolemy wrote foundational texts like his Tetrabiblos, trying to systematize it all.
And it caught on.
Big time. In the Roman Empire, it was everywhere. Public life, private life. Even emperors consulted astrologers for guidance on, well, pretty much everything.
But then Europe enters the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Did this knowledge get lost?
It could have, but Islamic scholars played an absolutely crucial role. During that period, they were the ones preserving and actually advancing astronomical knowledge.
How
Through meticulous translations of Greek, Persian, Indian texts, they refined instruments like the astrolabe, developed advanced math. But, and this is important, they were very careful to separate the astronomy they needed for religious practices.
like prayer times, finding Mecca.
Right. They separated that practical astronomy from predictive astrology, which many viewed with, let's say, theological caution.
Okay, so knowledge preserved, but then comes the scientific revolution. Copernicus, Newton. That must have shaken things up.
Fundamentally, Copernicus saying the Earth goes around the sun, Newton explaining gravity. These ideas directly challenged the old geocentric worldview that astrology was built on.
And that led to the split.
Yes, astronomy became the rigorous science of celestial mechanics, while astrology was increasingly seen by the scientific community as, well, superstition.
But here's a twist. You mentioned astrology somehow paving the way for science. How does that work?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But think about it. For centuries, astrologers were meticulously observing the skies, recording positions, doing calculations, looking for patterns.
Ah, so it was like early data analysis.
Exactly. One source called it the first data analysis enterprise. Astrologers were the original number crunchers, hunting for correlations. That methodology, observing, recording, seeking patterns, is fundamental to science today.
Any famous examples?
Johannes Kepler, a giant of the scientific revolution, famous for his laws of planetary motion.
Right.
He also cast horoscopes, partly to make a living, sure, but it shows how intertwined these fields were historically. It really demonstrates that deep human drive to find patterns, sometimes finding them even when they aren't really there from a scientific view.
It really does seem like for a long time, astrology was the main tool humanity had to try and make sense of a chaotic universe.
It was an attempt to find a blueprint, a structure, a sense of order before our modern scientific tools existed.
So despite the scientific and astronomical issues, it persists, and not just in the West. Let's broaden the view now. Look at how different cultures interpret the zodiac.
Absolutely. The Western system is just one flavor. Take Indian astrology, Jyotish.
What's different about it?
It's often called the science of light, deeply connected to Hindu philosophy, karma, dharma. And crucially, unlike most Western astrology, Jyotish uses the sidereal zodiac,
Sidereal, meaning
meaning it aligns with the actual current positions of the constellations in the sky. It accounts for that wobble, the precession we talked about.
so if I'm a Leo in Western astrology,
You might well be a Cancer, according to your Jyotish chart, because the constellations have shifted.
that's a major difference. And how is it used?
For big life decisions, often.
Yeah.
Marriage compatibility, huge in India. Career paths, even naming babies. And uniquely, Jyotish often involves prescribing remedial measures like prayers, gems, or actions to supposedly lessen negative planetary influences. It's more interactive, maybe.
Okay, what about Chinese astrology? That seems completely different.
Fundamentally different system. No planets ruling signs in the same way. It's based on a 12-year cycle, each year associated with an animal: rat, ox, tiger, etc. And also 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water.
And it's based on birth year, not month.
Mostly, yes, though month, day, and hour add layers. The focus tends to be more on, say, generational traits, broad life cycles, and especially how well different animal signs get along. Compatibility is key,
And culturally.
deeply embedded. Chinese New Year is all about the incoming animal sign. It's in folklore, everyday beliefs, and maybe reflects a more collectivist outlook, how you fit within the group, the family. Symbolism differs too. The Chinese dragon, Long, is generally seen as powerful and benevolent, quite different from some Western dragon myths.
Fascinating. Now, Islamic perspectives. You mentioned caution earlier.
Generally, yes. The dominant view expresses caution, often outright prohibition, regarding predictive astrology. It's seen as potentially conflicting with the absolute knowledge and power of God Tawhid, the oneness of God. Knowing the future is considered solely Allah's domain.
But they valued astronomy.
Immensely, but for practical purposes tied to religious observance, calculating prayer times, determining the direction of Mecca, creating calendars. They made a very clear distinction between that observational science and divination.
And indigenous traditions. Often very different again, I imagine.
Very much so. Many indigenous and African traditional beliefs have incredibly rich star lore, but it's often deeply tied to their specific environment, ancestral wisdom, and practical life.
Less about calculation, more about observation and story.
Often, yes. Passed down through oral traditions, storytelling, celestial observations guide agriculture, navigation, ceremonies. It's part of a holistic worldview connecting sky, land, and community.
Are the stars seen as predictive in the same way?
Less about predicting an individual's specific fate, and more about guidance for the community, understanding cycles, or even seeing stars as ancestors watching over them. Think of the Dogon people of Mali and their complex cosmology focus on Sirius. It's about deep cosmic understanding, not daily horoscopes.
Okay, so we have science saying no evidence, astronomy saying it's outdated, yet this incredible diversity and persistence across cultures and time. Which brings us squarely to the psychology. Why do people believe?
Right, this is the core of it. And the psychology is really compelling. One major factor seems to be coping.
Coping with what?
With uncertainty, with difficult times. Research shows belief in astrology often spikes during periods of social upheaval. Think the Great Depression, post-World War I Germany, and recently a noticeable surge after the COVID pandemic.
Why then?
It seems to offer a framework, a meaning map, when traditional structures or beliefs might feel like they're failing. It provides comfort, a sense of order in chaos. One psychologist who also practices astrology described it as feeling welcoming for all people during uncertain times.
Does it relate to feeling in control?
Yes, that's another big one. It can appeal particularly to people who feel like events are outside their control, what psychologists call an external locus of control. Astrology can offer an illusion of control, or at least a narrative that explains why things are happening. Even a bad horoscope can feel better than pure randomness for some.
And what about identity? Does it help people figure out who they are?
Absolutely. It's a powerful tool for self-identity and validation. Reading about your sign, especially the positive traits, can feel affirming, encouraging. It helps people feel they can develop their unique gifts.
And we tend to remember the good stuff, right?
Exactly. We're much more likely to recall feedback that confirms our positive self-image. Plus, the fact that a birth chart is based on your specific birth date, time, and place gives it a feeling of being personalized, a degree of credibility, even if the system itself isn't scientifically sound.
It also seems to provide answers when things are confusing.
That links back to coping, but also a basic human need: intolerance for ambiguity. We generally don't like uncertainty. Astrology offers answers, explanations, a sense of stability. It fulfills that profound desire to understand the world, especially during a difficult time.
So it meets several deep psychological needs. But how do we stick with it, even when faced with counter-evidence? This is where cognitive biases come in, isn't it?
Oh, massively. It's almost like astrology is perfectly designed to trigger our built-in mental shortcuts and biases. It's quite remarkable.
Okay, let's break some of those down. Which are the main culprits?
Well, probably the biggest one is confirmation bias. We notice and remember the times the horoscope seemed right, the hits, and we conveniently forget all the times it was wrong, the misses.
We focus on what fits our belief.
Precisely. Then there's the Barnum effect, or the Forer effect. This is huge for horoscopes.
Explain that one.
It's our tendency to accept vague, general statements as being highly specific and accurate descriptions of ourselves. Horoscopes often use statements that could apply to almost anyone. You're facing a challenge but have inner strength. An unexpected opportunity may arise.
And we think, wow, that's totally me.
Exactly, even though it could be totally anyone. Think about fortune cookies, personality quizzes online. They often rely heavily on the Barnum effect.
Oh, God bells.
Cognitive dissonance. If we've invested time, maybe money, or just emotional energy into believing in astrology, it creates mental discomfort to admit it might be wrong. So we rationalize, double down on the belief to avoid that discomfort.
Easier to keep believing than admit we were mistaken.
Often, yes. Then you have social proof, or the bandwagon effect. If lots of people around us believe it, or if it's an ancient tradition, millions of people for thousands of years can't be totally wrong, it seems more plausible.
Safety in numbers.
Kind of. And underlying it all is that fundamental need for meaning or purpose. Astrology provides a narrative, a sense that things happen for a reason, that our lives are connected to something vast and cosmic.
It feels less random.
Exactly. And our brains are pattern recognition machines. We're wired to see patterns, sometimes even in random noise. So we connect celestial events to life events, even if there's no causal link.
What about things like flattering predictions?
That's self-serving bias. We're much more inclined to believe predictions or descriptions that are positive or make us feel good about ourselves.
Makes sense.
Hmm?
Are there other factors too?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes, unfortunately, there can be emotional manipulation. Skilled astrologers might use hot reading, picking up clues from your appearance, speech, maybe even stuff they found online to make their readings seem uncannily specific. Not psychic, just good observation or research.
Sneaky.
It can be. Plus, simple lack of education. People just might not know about the scientific studies debunking it. Cultural conditioning growing up with it makes it seem normal. And the placebo effect is powerful too.
How does that apply?
If reading your horoscope makes you feel more confident or hopeful, and then you act on that confidence and something good happens, you might attribute it to the horoscope being right. It felt good, so it must be correct. That's emotional reasoning.
Wow. It's like a perfect storm of psychological factors.
It really is. Need for certainty, attributing things to external forces, attribution bias, the vagueness allowing personal interpretation, ambiguity tolerance, simplifying life's complexity. It all plays a part.
Okay, so the psychology is powerful. But let's switch gears slightly. Even within astrology itself, there are common stereotypes about the signs that even astrologers might push back on, right?
Absolutely. Just like any system describing people, you get these oversimplified, often negative stereotypes. But if you look at how astrology describes the signs, it's usually more nuanced.
Let's take a couple. Aries, always angry, loves fighting.
That's the myth. The astrological fact or core idea is more about being brave, a pioneer taking initiative. The anger might be seen as frustrated energy when they can't move forward or lead.
Okay, Taurus just cares about money, super stubborn.
Myth again. The idea is they value security, comfort, beauty. They're seen as patient, loyal, reliable. The stubbornness is often framed as determination or steadfastness, not necessarily negative.
Gemini, two-faced, unreliable.
Classic stereotype. The astrological view emphasizes their curiosity, love of learning, communication, adaptability. Seeing multiple sides isn't necessarily being two-faced, it's being mentally flexible.
Scorpio, sneaky, vengeful.
Often gets a bad rap. Astrologically, the focus is on passion, loyalty, intensity, emotional depth, protectiveness. The sneakiness might be misinterpreted depth or a need for privacy.
So it seems even the astrological interpretations are often deeper than the pop culture versions.
Definitely. Cancer isn't just weepy, but caring. Leo isn't just vain, but confident and generous. Virgo isn't just critical, but detail-oriented and helpful, and so on for all 12 signs. The popular myths often pick one negative trait and ignore the rest.
Now, you mentioned earlier that some weak scientific links exist between birth month and personality. How does that fit in?
Right. It's crucial to understand this. Some studies have found very weak correlations between the season or month someone is born and certain traits or even health outcomes.
But it's not the stars causing it.
No, the scientific explanation points to environmental or social factors. Things like maybe the mother's diet or exposure to sunlight during pregnancy varies seasonally. Or maybe it's purely social, like how kids born at certain times of the year might be the oldest or youngest in their school class, affecting confidence or development.
Ah, so it's earthly factors related to timing, not cosmic influence.
Precisely. And these factors would change depending on the culture, the school system cutoff dates, the climate. The stars' positions are consistent, but these weak correlations are variable.
Okay, so if it's not scientifically predictive, can astrology still be, like, useful? Maybe for self-reflection?
I think many people use it that way, almost like a personality framework, similar to Myers-Briggs, or even, as one source suggested, a D&D character sheet, a lens to think about yourself.
How does that work psychologically?
It might tap into something called labeling theory. If you constantly read that, as a Libra, you're supposed to be balanced, fair, and calm, you might start to internalize that label.
And act more that way.
Potentially, yes. You might focus on developing those traits. It becomes a kind of self-guided suggestion rather than a cosmic mandate.
And astrologically, the signs are grouped by elements, suggesting different styles.
Yes. Fire signs Aries, Leo, Sagittarius are seen as spontaneous, bold, perhaps impulsive in decisions.
Well, that's the signs. Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn.
Practical, methodical, cautious. They want solid ground.
Air signs Gemini, Libra, Aquarius.
More intellectual, communicative, collaborative. They like to weigh options, get different perspectives.
And water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces.
Led by emotion, intuition, reflection. Decisions might be more gut feel.
And people might use this framework to understand themselves in, say, work or relationships.
Exactly. From an astrological perspective, it suggests leadership styles. Maybe Aries leads differently than Capricorn, teamwork approaches, even relationship compatibility or conflict styles.
So the idea is, by understanding your supposed astrological traits.
You could consciously work on perceived weaknesses. Maybe a Capricorn tries to be more spontaneous, or a Gemini works on decisiveness, or leverage strengths, and Aries embraces their assertiveness, a Libra their diplomacy.
It's a tool for self-awareness,
Yeah.
then, separate from prediction.
Right. And one interesting insight from this perspective is the idea that we all encompass a little bit of every zodiac sign within us. It's not just being one thing, but a complex mix.
This whole exploration really touches on some deep philosophical territory, doesn't it? Especially that age-old question, fate versus free will.
Absolutely. The history of the zodiac is intertwined with that debate. Early on, especially with influences like Stoicism, astrology often leaned towards a deterministic view.
Meaning our lives were basically mapped out by the stars.
Largely, yes. The idea was that celestial patterns determine events and personality. Wisdom, for the Stoics, partly lay in understanding and accepting this cosmic necessity.
But religious traditions push back hard against that.
Very hard. Christian and Islamic theology in particular emphasize God's ultimate power and, crucially, human free will and moral responsibility. The idea that stars dictated our choices, especially moral ones, was often seen as undermining divine authority and human agency.
So how do they reconcile the apparent influence of the heavens?
Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas proposed a middle ground. He argued stars might incline us towards certain temperaments or possibilities, but they don't compel us. Our reason and will remain free. The stars propose, man disposes, essentially.
What about a more modern psychological take, like Carl Jung's?
Jung had a fascinating perspective. He wasn't necessarily endorsing predictive astrology, but he saw the zodiac signs as powerful archetypes.
Archetypes, like universal patterns.
Exactly. Expressions of the collective unconscious fundamental patterns of human personality and experience that resonate across cultures and time. He called astrology a kind of naively projected psychology, even a 5,000-year-old psychology, describing these basic human types.
So for Jung, it wasn't about the stars dictating, but about the symbols reflecting deep psychological truths.
Precisely. The power lay in the symbolic map of the psyche it offered, showing potential predispositions we can engage with consciously, not fixed fates we're bound to.
Thinking about fate also raises ethical questions, doesn't it?
It does. If everything's predetermined, what happens to personal responsibility? Can we hold people accountable? And historically, there were always concerns about astrologers potentially exploiting people's fears or hopes for gain. Medieval texts sometimes warned against judicial astrology used for harmful predictions.
And has it been used ideologically to support certain power structures?
Oh, certainly. In ancient times, rulers might use favorable astrological readings to legitimize their power. It could reinforce social hierarchies. Today, you could argue it aligns with a different ideology, one of individual self-discovery, maybe consumerism.
How so?
Think about the huge market for astrology apps, personalized readings, horoscope columns, and lifestyle magazines. It fits neatly into the modern self-care economy, offering tools for identity exploration in a world where traditional sources of meaning might feel weaker. It's driven by market forces as much as ancient belief.
So beyond science, beyond even the psychology of belief, maybe its deepest power lies in myth.
I think that's a really strong argument. Each zodiac sign is packed with rich stories, drawing from Greek, Roman, Mesopotamian, Egyptian mythologies. These aren't just labels, they're narratives.
Symbolic templates for human experience.
Exactly. Aries isn't just brave, it echoes myths like Jason and the Golden Fleece, embodying that pioneering, questing energy. Libra isn't just fair, it is the scales of justice held by Themis or Astrea, representing the deep human need for balance and order.
So the myths give the signs their resonance.
They provide this incredibly rich symbolic language for talking about universal human traits, struggles, potentials. These archetypal stories connect with something deep in our collective psyche, which is why they keep popping up in literature, art, psychology, and yes, popular culture, even now.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We really have, from the science or lack thereof to the shaky astronomical foundations,
Through its incredible historical journey across vastly different cultures.
and landing on the really powerful psychological reasons why it endures coping, control, identity, meaning,
Plus those cognitive biases that make us susceptible.
and finally seeing it not just as prediction, but as a tool for self-reflection, a carrier of ancient myths, and part of that ongoing human conversation about fate and free will.
It's a complex picture.
Definitely not a simple true or false.
So maybe a final thought for you, listening. Now that you've heard about these powerful cognitive biases, this deep human need for meaning and connection, how might that change how you look at information?
Not just about astrology, but maybe about any belief system, any trend, anything that captures widespread attention, especially when the world feels uncertain.
Could recognizing these patterns in ourselves enhance your critical thinking, your self-awareness?
Maybe help you sift through information, find value or meaning where you choose, even if it's not strictly scientific, but do it with open eyes, something to chew on.